Tonight's story is about what happens when a family believes the wrong person. A diamond necklace worth nearly $500,000 disappears during a birthday party, and one sister is accused in front of everyone. But days later, a dashcam video reveals the one thing no one noticed that night. Stay till the end of the story because when the footage is played in court, the truth is impossible to ignore.
My sister called the police on me in the middle of my mom's 70th birthday party and told everyone in the room that I had stolen a $500,000 diamond necklace. The strange thing is, I did not yell. I did not even cry. Instead, I just stood there holding a glass of sparkling water, while 30 people slowly turned their heads and looked at me like I had always been exactly the kind of person who would do something like that. Instead, my sister dialed 911. And the truth that came out of that moment would tear our family apart in ways none of us were ready for. But I did not know that yet. At the time, I was just standing in my mom's living room, watching my sister accuse me of theft in front of It is quiet work. Gardens, stone paths, small backyard transformations for people who want something peaceful outside their windows. It is a very different life from the one my parents built in Chicago. My mom and dad own a successful home interior company that started small and grew bigger every year I was growing up. The business meant long hours, constant travel, and dinners with investors instead of family meals. My older sister grew up right in the middle of that world. She went to the best schools, built the right connections, and eventually became a high-profile attorney in Chicago. I grew up somewhere else. When I was very young, my parents sent me to live with my grandparents just a few months until things settled down. But businesses do not settle down when they are growing. Months became years. My grandparents raised me in a quiet house that overlooked Lake Superior. My grandfather taught me how to plant tomatoes in neat rows and how to sharpen a shovel properly. My grandma baked cinnamon bread every Sunday morning and told me stories about the neighborhood when it was still full of fishing families. I never felt unloved there, but Chicago always felt like a place I visited rather than a place that belonged to me. The older I got, the more obvious the difference became. My sister lived inside my parents' world. I orbited somewhere far outside of it. So when my mom invited me to come down for her 70th birthday party, I actually felt hopeful. It had been a long time since we were all together for something happy. I left Duluth early that morning. The drive to Chicago takes about 6 hours if traffic behaves. I listened to an old country station most of the way and watched the trees slowly change from the quiet northern forests to the busier edges of Illinois. By the time I reached Lincoln Park, the sky had started turning soft gold with early evening light. My parents' house sat on a wide tree-lined street filled with old brick homes and expensive cars, the kind of neighborhood where everything looks polished even on an ordinary Tuesday. I parked along the curb and sat in my car for a moment before going inside. I always did that when I visited, just a few seconds to steady myself before stepping into a life that had never quite fit me. The house was already busy when I walked in. The smell of catered food drifted through the hallway. Soft jazz played somewhere in the background. People's voices blended into a comfortable buzz of conversation. Laura Bennett, the event planner my mom had hired, was moving quickly between the kitchen and the dining room, checking small details. She spotted me near the door and smiled politely. "Rachel Wright, welcome. Your mom is upstairs getting ready." I nodded and set my overnight bag near the coat rack. The living room was filled with people my parents had known for years. Business partners, longtime friends, a few relatives I recognized but had not seen in a long time. My sister stood near the fireplace speaking with two of my dad's colleagues. She looked exactly like she always did in professional settings. Perfect posture, perfect hair, calm confidence that made people listen when she spoke. When she noticed me, she gave a quick smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "You made it. Traffic was not too bad," I said. She nodded once and turned back to her conversation. That was our version of a warm family greeting. After a few minutes, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. Laura pointed upstairs and told me the hallway bathroom was just past my mom's bedroom. The upstairs hallway looked exactly the same as it had when I was a teenager. Framed family photos lined the walls. Most of them showed my sister at graduations or award ceremonies. I was in a few pictures, but they were older ones, taken back when I still visited Chicago more often. I found the bathroom, washed my hands, and glanced briefly down the hallway toward my mom's bedroom door, which was closed. Then I went back downstairs. Nothing felt unusual. The party kept building as more guests arrived. Someone opened a bottle of champagne. My dad moved through the room shaking hands and greeting people with the relaxed charm he had always used in business. About 20 minutes later, the music stopped. At first, I thought someone had simply paused the speaker. Then I heard my mom's voice from upstairs. It sounded wrong, not loud, but sharp with panic. Victoria. A moment later, my sister's heels moved quickly across the upstairs hallway. Conversations in the living room slowed. My dad looked toward the staircase. What is going on? My sister appeared at the top of the stairs with my mom behind her. My mom looked pale, one hand pressed against the railing. The necklace is gone, she said. The room went completely still. My dad frowned slightly. What do you mean gone? My mom swallowed and tried to steady her voice. The diamond necklace, the one you gave me for our anniversary. I opened the box and it was not there. That necklace was famous inside our family. My dad had bought it years earlier to celebrate 40 years of marriage. It was worth nearly $500,000 and my mom wore it only on special occasions. Victoria's expression changed instantly. The calm attorney disappeared and the investigator took her place. Who has been upstairs today? Laura stepped forward carefully. Just your mom. And I think Rachel went up a little while ago looking for the bathroom. Every head in the room turned toward me. Victoria looked directly at me. You were upstairs earlier. Yes, just for the bathroom. She stared at me for a long moment, then she said the sentence that split the night in half. You have always been broke, who else would take it? The words hung in the air like something fragile that had just shattered. I heard someone near the back of the room whisper softly, "Oh my God." My first instinct was not anger, it was disbelief. Not because my sister accused me, that part almost made sense given how distant we had always been, but because she said it so easily, like she had already believed it for years. Victoria pulled her phone from her purse. If the necklace is missing, we handled this properly. She began dialing. Someone near the dining table said maybe we should look around first. Victoria shook her head. No, if it is stolen, the police need to know immediately. I watched her speak calmly into the phone, explaining that a high-value piece of jewelry had disappeared during a private event. No one in the room spoke to me. My dad avoided looking in my direction. My mom looked confused and frightened, but she did not defend me either. That silence hurt more than the accusation itself. About 20 minutes later, 2 Chicago police officers arrived. Officer Nolan Briggs asked everyone to remain inside while they asked a few questions. They started with simple things. Who had access to the upstairs rooms? Who had access to the upstairs rooms? Who had seen the necklace last? Who had been upstairs recently? Laura repeated what she had said earlier. Rachel went up to use the bathroom. Officer Briggs looked at me. You live here? No, I said. I live in Duluth. You arrived today. Yes. He nodded slowly, writing something down. The room felt smaller with every question. Finally, he asked me directly if I had taken the necklace. I could feel every person in the house watching. My sister's eyes were fixed on me like she was waiting for the moment I slipped and confessed. But I did not feel the need to argue. I set my glass down on the table beside me and spoke calmly. If you think I took it, then investigate. My voice surprised even me, because deep down something inside me had already shifted. For the first time in my life, I realized that no matter what I said, the people in that room had already decided who I was, and the truth that would come out later would not just clear my name. It would expose things about our family that had been hidden for years. But that part of the story had not happened yet. That night was only the beginning. I did not leave the house right away after the police finished asking questions. Most of the guests slowly gathered their coats and drifted toward the front door, their voices low, careful, the way people talk when they are unsure what they are supposed to believe. Some of them glanced at me with polite sympathy. Others avoided looking at me at all. The party that had been planned for weeks dissolved in less than an hour. The catering tray sat half full on the dining table. The cake my mom had chosen sat untouched near the kitchen counter. 70 candles were still in the box. I stood near the living room window, watching the last police car pull away from the curb. No one had been arrested. No one had been cleared either. But the silence that settled over the house told me exactly what everyone was thinking. My sister believed I had taken the necklace, and when Victoria believed something, most people assumed she was right. That has been true for most of our lives. I grew up somewhere else. Not emotionally, but physically. That difference shaped everything that came later. My mom and dad built their company in Chicago when they were still young and determined to prove themselves. Whitaker Home Interiors started in a small showroom on the north side of the city and slowly grew into a successful business designing luxury interiors for hotels, offices, and wealthy private homes. By the time I was born, the company had already begun expanding. Opportunity has a strange way of demanding everything from the people chasing it. Long hours turned into longer weeks. Business dinners replaced family meals. Flights across the country became routine. My parents did what ambitious people often do when they are building something they believe will last. They prioritized the future. At the time, they probably believed they were doing it for their children, but children experience absence in a different way. My older sister grew up inside that busy world. She was already in school when the company began growing quickly, and she stayed in Chicago with my parents. I arrived later when the business was accelerating. By the time I was old enough to form memories, my parents were traveling constantly. The decision was practical. My grandparents lived in Duluth and had the time and stability my parents no longer had, so I moved north. What was supposed to be temporary quietly became permanent. My grandparents raised me in a house that sat on a gentle hill overlooking Lake Superior. The water stretched out like a sheet of gray glass most mornings, and when the wind picked up, you could hear the waves moving against the rocks even from the front porch. My grandfather believed that children should grow up with routines. He woke up early every morning, made coffee, and read the newspaper at the same wooden table where I ate breakfast before school. My grandma believed that children should grow up feeling safe. She baked constantly. Bread, pies, cinnamon rolls, anything that filled the house with warmth during the long northern winters. They never made me feel like I had been sent away. They simply loved me. I had my own room with a window that faced the lake. In the winter, the glass frosted over in beautiful patterns that looked like delicate white leaves, the Bacchae and Vone. In the summer, I could hear seagulls calling before the sun rose. It was a quiet childhood. Not lonely, just quiet. My parents visited when they could. Sometimes for holidays, sometimes for a weekend if their schedules allowed it. Those visits always felt slightly formal. My mom would bring expensive clothes I did not need. My dad would ask careful questions about school while checking his phone between sentences. They cared in the way people care when they believe providing opportunities is the same as being present. But the people who taught me how to ride a bicycle, who helped with homework, who showed up at school concerts, were my grandparents. They were the ones who raised me. Meanwhile, my sister grew up in Chicago, surrounded by the energy of the business my parents were building. She attended private schools where students discussed college plans before they were even teenagers. She interned at law firms while still in college. She learned early how to move through professional rooms with confidence. My parents were proud of her, and they had every reason to be. Victoria was brilliant, focused, determined in a way that made success almost inevitable. By the time she finished law school, she had already secured a position at one of the most respected firms in Chicago. Her career grew quickly after that. When people spoke about my family, they usually mentioned her achievements first. I did not resent that. We simply lived in different worlds. My world was quieter. I studied landscape design because I loved working outside. Plants, soil, the slow transformation of a space into something peaceful. After finishing school, I stayed in Duluth and started working independently. Small projects at first, backyard gardens, stone walkways, restoring neglected yards for families who wanted something beautiful outside their homes. The work was not glamorous, but it felt honest, and it gave me a life that fit who I was. Still, every time I visited Chicago, I could feel the distance between my life and the life my parents had built. Their house in Lincoln Park was large and elegant, filled with carefully chosen furniture and art pieces collected from around the world. Every room looked like it belonged in a design magazine. I never quite knew where I fit inside it. Even my old bedroom had eventually been converted into a guest room. When I stayed overnight, I slept in the same space any visitor might use. That detail was small, but it always reminded me that Chicago was not truly my home. Victoria moved easily through that house. She knew every neighbor, every business partner who came to dinner, every small detail of my parents' professional lives. I moved through it cautiously, like someone walking through a museum after hours. The older we became, the more obvious those differences grew. She spoke confidently about legal strategies and high-profile cases. I talked about soil conditions and native plants that survived northern winters. Neither life was wrong. but one life looked more impressive in rooms filled with investors and executives. Which is why, when my sister accused me of stealing that necklace, the idea made sense to the people listening. Not because they believed I was cruel, but because they believed I was the least successful person in the room. In families like ours, success quietly shapes trust. No one said that out loud that night. They did not have to. I could see it in the way people looked at me. They did not have to. I could see it in the way people looked at me. The police questions had been polite but direct. You live out of town. You were upstairs earlier. You had access. Each fact seemed harmless on its own. Together they formed a story. And my sister believed that story completely. After the officers finished their questions, most of the guests left quickly. No one wanted to linger in a house where a family accusation had just turned into a police investigation. My mom sat at the dining table staring at the untouched birthday cake. The candles were still in their plastic sleeves. My dad stood near the window with his arms folded across his chest. Victoria remained calm in the way she always did when facing conflict. She looked at me once before turning back to speak quietly with one of the officers. Her expression did not contain anger. It contained certainty. That was what stayed with me most. Certainty that I had done something unforgivable. Eventually, the officers said they would follow up after reviewing the information they had collected. They left their contact details and reminded everyone not to remove anything from the house until the situation was clarified. Then they walked out into the night. The front door closed behind them with a soft sound that echoed through the hallway. For a moment, no one moved. The party decorations still hung from the walls. Gold ribbons. A banner that said Happy 70th Birthday. It looked strangely cheerful in a room that had become painfully quiet. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair. My sister noticed. You are leaving already. Her voice was calm. Yes. She studied me for a moment. You understand why I had to call the police. I met her eyes. You did what you believed was right. She nodded once, satisfied with that answer. I walked toward the door. As I stepped outside, the night air felt cool and sharp against my face. The street was quiet again, the way it had been when I arrived earlier that evening. Only now, everything felt different. I sat in my car for a long moment without starting the engine. Inside the house behind me, my family was probably still discussing what had happened, trying to make sense of a story that felt simple to them. The quiet daughter from Duluth, the missing necklace, the easy conclusion. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and looked at the dark windows of the house where my parents lived. For most of my life, I had believed distance was simply a result of circumstance. That night, I began to understand it might have been something deeper, and the investigation that followed would force all of us to face truths that had been quietly building for years. But that part of the story had not unfolded yet. 2 days passed after the birthday party, and the silence from Chicago settled over me like a thick fog. I drove back to Duluth the morning after everything happened. The road north felt longer than usual. The radio played softly, but I barely heard any of it. My mind kept replaying the same moment over and over again. My sister was standing in the middle of the living room, holding her phone, telling everyone I had stolen something worth $500,000. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the lake looked gray and calm the way it always did in early autumn. The trees around my house had just begun turning yellow and orange. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful that usually made me grateful for the life I had built away from Chicago. But that day, the quiet felt different. It felt like waiting. The phone call came in the early afternoon, 2 days later, while I was standing in my kitchen rinsing dirt from a set of gardening tools. I had spent the morning finishing a landscaping project for a couple who lived a few blocks from the lake. Planting shrubs, adjusting stone borders, the kind of work that usually cleared my mind. My phone buzzed against the counter. I glanced down and saw my sister's name. For a moment, I just looked at the screen without touching it. Victoria rarely called me. When she did, it usually meant something serious. I dried my hands on a towel and answered. Her voice sounded calm, controlled, the same voice she used when speaking in courtrooms. Rachel. I waited. She did not start with a greeting. If you took the necklace, you should return it now. The words landed softly, but they carried the weight of a final decision. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes for a moment. I did not take the necklace. There was a small pause on the line, the kind that happens when someone decides whether they believe what they just heard. You were upstairs earlier that evening, she said. I know. And the necklace disappeared sometime after that. I did not answer right away. I walked over to the window and looked out toward the lake. The wind had picked up slightly, pushing small waves against the shoreline. Victoria continued speaking in the same calm voice. You were the only person who went upstairs during that time. I used the bathroom. That is not the point, she said quietly. The point is that you had access. Her logic was simple, too simple. In her mind, the sequence of events was obvious. I went upstairs. The necklace vanished. Therefore, I must have taken it. It was the kind of reasoning that made sense when someone had already chosen the conclusion. Victoria, I said slowly, I did not take it. Another pause. Rachel, I am trying to give you a chance to fix this. Fix this. The words stung more than the accusation itself. If you return the necklace now, she said, we can avoid making this worse. Mom is already devastated. Dad is furious. You do not want this to become a criminal matter. I almost laughed. Almost. What do you think I did, Victoria? I asked quietly. Walk into Mom's bedroom, take a $500,000 diamond necklace, and then drive 6 hours back to Duluth with it in my pocket. You have struggled financially before, she said. That sentence told me everything. My career had never impressed my family. Freelance work did not carry the same respect as law firms and corporate contracts. In their world, success was measured in large numbers and polished offices. Gardens did not count. I stood there listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator while my sister waited for an answer. I am not returning something I did not take, I said. Her tone hardened slightly. Then we let the police handle it. I thought they already were. They are. But I filed the official report yesterday morning. The words settled heavily in the room. You filed it. Yes. My hand tightened around the edge of the counter. You really believe I stole from Mom? Her answer came without hesitation. Rachel, the facts point in one direction. I exhaled slowly. Facts. The words sounded strange coming from someone who had already built the entire story in her head. Victoria was a lawyer. She had spent years building cases from timelines and details. To her, this situation looked like a case she already understood. Opportunity, access, a missing item, the quiet sister who never quite fit into the family's world. It was neat and convincing, and it was wrong. I did not argue any more. There was no point. If the police want to talk to me again, I said, they know how to reach me. Rachel. Her voice softened slightly, almost as if she believed she was being kind. I am not trying to hurt you. I closed my eyes. You already did. Then I ended the call. The house felt unusually quiet after that. I stood in the kitchen for several minutes staring at my phone. The call had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it left something heavy behind. A few hours later, the messages began arriving. The first one came from an aunt who lived in Wisconsin. She wrote that she heard something strange had happened at the party and asked if everything was all right. The next message came from a cousin. He asked directly if the rumors were true. Rumors! That word traveled faster than truth in families like ours. By evening, I had received messages from 4 different relatives. Some were careful, some were blunt. No one outright called me a thief, but the questions all carried the same quiet suspicion. What happened? Why did the police come? Did you take it? I answered only a few of them. Mostly I said the situation was still being investigated, which was technically true, but the investigation had already taken place inside people's minds. They had heard my sister's version of events first, and Victoria had always been the one people trusted. Late that night, my mom sent a text message. Just one sentence. The police will figure it out. That was all she wrote. No accusation, but no defense either. I stared at the message for a long time before setting my phone down on the kitchen table. The truth is, I did not feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter. Recognition. For years, I had believed the distance between my life and my family's life was simply a result of geography. Chicago and Duluth were very different places. Our careers were different, our routines were different, but deep down I had always believed we still trusted each other. That belief began fading the moment my sister called the police, and the conversations that followed made it disappear completely. The next morning, I drove into town to meet a client about a garden redesign. We walked through her backyard discussing which plants would survive the winter winds coming off the lake. I nodded and took notes, but my mind kept drifting back to Chicago, to the quiet certainty in my sister's voice, to the messages from relatives who suddenly viewed me through a different lens. It was not the accusation itself that hurt the most. It was how easily everyone accepted it. I finished the meeting and drove home in the late afternoon. The sky over the lake had turned a pale silver color that usually meant rain was coming. I parked in my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, listening to the wind moving through the trees. Somewhere in Chicago, my family was probably discussing the situation again, reviewing details, confirming the story they had already built. The daughter who grew up somewhere else, the one who did not belong to their world, the one who must have needed money, the one who must have needed money, the one who had access. From their perspective, the explanation made sense, and once a story makes sense to people, it becomes very difficult to convince them they are wrong. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward my front door. At that moment, I still believed the investigation would eventually clear everything up, that the truth would surface naturally, that someone in my family would realize how impossible their version of events really was. What I did not know yet was that the truth had already been captured, quietly, accidentally, and it was sitting inside a small digital file I had not even looked at yet. The week that followed the birthday party moved slowly, but the silence from my family moved even slower. The lake changed colors with the shifting light. The wind pushed colder air across the water each morning. People walked their dogs along the shore and waved to each other the way neighbors always had. But inside my house, everything felt suspended, waiting. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a small tightening in my chest before looking at the screen. Sometimes it was a client asking about a project timeline. Sometimes it was a message from someone in my family. Those messages never said the word thief, but the questions never said the word thief. On the fourth day after the party, my phone rang just after lunch. The number showed Chicago. I answered and heard a familiar voice. Officer Briggs. He sounded professional and calm, the same way he had that night in my parents' living room. Miss Whitaker, I hope I am not interrupting your day. No, I said. What can I help you with? We are still reviewing the information from the evening of your mother's birthday. I had a few follow-up questions if you have a moment. I stepped outside onto my small back porch. The air smelled faintly of pine trees and damp soil. Of course. He asked me to walk through the timeline again. What time did I arrive at the house? Where I parked? How long I stayed downstairs before going upstairs? Which bathroom I used? Whether I saw anyone else in the upstairs hallway. The questions were careful and methodical. I answered each one the same way I had the first night. I arrived shortly before 6 in the evening. I parked on the street. I went upstairs only once to use the bathroom. I did not see anyone else in the hallway. Officer Briggs paused for a moment after writing something down. Miss Whitaker, he said, you understand that because the necklace is valued at nearly $500,000, we have to treat this as a serious theft investigation. I understand. He cleared his throat slightly. Your sister indicated that you may have experienced financial difficulties recently. I felt the familiar sting of that assumption again. My work is stable, I said. I run my own landscape design business. There was another short pause. Thank you for clarifying that. His tone remained neutral, but the direction of the conversation was obvious. In investigations like this, people tend to look first at whoever appears to have the strongest motive. And money is an easy motive. We will continue reviewing the information, he said finally. If anything new comes up, we may need to speak again. That is fine. He thanked me for my time and ended the call. I stayed on the porch for a few minutes after the conversation ended. The lake was restless that afternoon. Gray waves rolled steadily toward the rocky shoreline below the hill. It struck me that the investigation had not changed the story very much. In Chicago, my sister had already built a version of events that made perfect sense to her. And that version was quietly spreading. I did not hear the exact conversations happening in my parents' house, but pieces of them reached me through relatives. The first piece arrived that evening. My cousin Mark called while I was making dinner. We had grown up together during summer visits to our grandparents' house, and he usually called only during holidays. His voice sounded awkward the moment I answered. Hey, Rachel. Hey, Mark. There was a short pause before he spoke again. Listen, I heard things got pretty tense at the birthday party. You could say that. Another pause. Victoria mentioned you might be going through a rough patch financially. I set the wooden spoon down on the kitchen counter. Did she say that? Well, not exactly like that, he said quickly. She just said you have been struggling with work lately. I looked down at the pot simmering on the stove. My work is fine. Right. I figured it probably was not true. He hesitated again. Rachel. Yes. Did you really take it? The question hung in the air between us. He did not sound angry, just uncertain, which somehow made it worse. No, Mark, of course not. I heard him exhale slowly. Okay. I just wanted to ask you directly. I appreciated the honesty, even if the question itself hurt. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things before ending the call. But the damage had already been done. Once someone asks that question out loud, something shifts in the relationship. It means the possibility had already taken root in their mind. Over the next few days, more small signals arrived. A message from an aunt asking if everything would be cleared up soon. A text from another cousin saying they hoped the situation was just a misunderstanding. No one said they believed I was guilty, but no one said they believed I was innocent either. One evening, I checked my phone and saw a message from my mom. Just one sentence: "The police will figure it out." I read it 3 times. She had not asked how I was doing. She had not said she believed me. She had simply placed the outcome in the hands of the investigation. My mom had always been careful with words. In business, she understood that saying too much could create problems. But in that moment, her caution felt like distance. I typed several responses before deleting them. Eventually, I wrote only 2 words: "I hope so." She never replied. My dad did not contact me at all. That silence spoke louder than anything he might have said. When I was younger, my dad had always believed strongly in solving problems quickly. Fix the issue, move forward, do not waste time dwelling on conflict. But this situation could not be fixed with a business decision. It required choosing which person to trust. And my dad had chosen to stay quiet. By the end of that week, the pattern had become clear. The investigation was moving slowly. My family was speaking carefully, and the distance between us had grown wider than it had ever been before. Late one evening, I sat on the wooden steps outside my house, watching the last light fade over the lake. The sky turned deep blue, and the first stars appeared above the dark water. I thought about the years I had spent believing that the separation between my life and my family's life was simply a matter of geography. Chicago was busy and ambitious. Duluth was quiet and steady. I had always told myself that difference did not matter, but now I began to see something I had missed before. Trust inside families is not only built through love, it is built through presence, through the small daily moments when people learn who you truly are. My sister had grown up with my parents every day. They knew her habits, her routines, the way she handled pressure. I had grown up somewhere else. To them, I was still the girl who visited occasionally, the one whose life they understood only in broad outlines. When the necklace disappeared, they filled the gaps in that understanding with assumptions, and the assumptions pointed in my direction. Sitting there in the quiet darkness, I realized something that should have been obvious long before that night in Chicago. I had been standing outside my own family for years. The accusation had simply made that position visible to everyone. The wind picked up across the lake, rustling the leaves in the trees above my house. I wrapped my arms around myself against the growing cold. Somewhere far away in Chicago, the investigation continued quietly. My sister remained certain of her version of events. My parents waited for answers. And I sat alone in Duluth, watching the water move under the moonlight, still believing that eventually the truth would surface on its own, still not realizing that the evidence that could change everything had already been recorded, and that in a few days, purely by accident, I was going to discover it. The discovery did not come through a phone call or a police update or some dramatic confession. It arrived quietly on a Tuesday morning while I was standing barefoot in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand. August 27th had begun like any other late summer morning in Duluth. The air coming through the open window carried the cool scent of the lake. I had finished watering the small herb garden behind the house and was getting ready to a notification from the dash camera app connected to my car. Cloud storage almost full. Please review and delete old video files. I had installed that camera about a year earlier after a minor accident near the harbor. Nothing serious, just enough to remind me that unpredictable things happened on northern roads, especially during winter. The camera automatically recorded every drive and uploaded the footage to a cloud account. Normally, I ignored those notifications for weeks. But that morning I had a few minutes before leaving the house, so I picked up my phone and opened the app. A long list of dates appeared on the screen. Each one represented a drive the camera had recorded. Short clips from trips to the grocery store, drives to job sites, the long highway stretch between Duluth and Chicago. Most of the videos were completely ordinary. Roads, traffic lights, passing trees. I began scrolling through them slowly, selecting older files and deleting them to free up space. The process was simple. Tap a clip, preview it for a second, then press delete. One after another, the files disappeared. Eventually, I reached the videos recorded during the drive to Chicago for my mom's birthday. For a moment, I hesitated. Seeing those dates on the screen stirred a quiet tension in my chest. But I reminded myself that the videos only showed roads and highways, nothing important. I tapped the first clip. The camera showed the empty stretch of highway leaving Duluth early that morning. Pale sunlight reflecting off the lake, the road stretching south through rows of pine trees. Delete. The next clip showed traffic entering the outskirts of Chicago. Delete. Another clip showed my car turning into the quiet street where my parents lived in Lincoln Park. I paused briefly. The camera faced forward through my windshield, capturing the neat line of parked cars and tall trees arching above the street. I remembered pulling up to the curb and sitting in the car for a moment before going inside. Delete. More clips appeared, short recordings of the car sitting parked along the curb while the party unfolded inside the house. I tapped one of them. The angle was different from the earlier videos. This time, the camera had captured part of the driveway behind my parents' house through the rear view angle of the dash camera. The timestamp showed early evening, probably sometime around when guests were arriving. Nothing unusual. I moved my thumb toward the delete button. Then something shifted in the frame. A small movement near the back entrance of the house caught my attention. I stopped. My thumb hovered above the screen. A figure stepped out through the rear door and moved quickly toward the driveway. At first, the image looked too small to identify. I leaned closer to the phone and tapped the screen to enlarge the video. The man walked into a clearer view. Thomas, my sister's husband. I frowned slightly. There was nothing strange about him being outside the house. He had been at the party that night like everyone else. Still, something about the way he moved made me pause. He stepped out onto the driveway and immediately looked around. Not casually, carefully. The movement was quick but deliberate, the way someone checks a room before saying something important. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, holding the phone in both hands now. Thomas turned his head toward the street, then toward the backyard, then toward the side of the house. He looked like he was making sure no one was watching. A small, uneasy feeling moved through me. Maybe he had simply stepped outside to take a phone call. That was common enough at gatherings. But instead of pulling out his phone, he walked briskly across the driveway toward the street where cars were parked. The camera angle followed him for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. His foot caught slightly on the edge of the driveway. It was not a dramatic stumble, just enough to break his stride, but in that brief moment, something small slipped from his hand. A dark shape fell toward the pavement. Thomas stopped instantly. He bent down quickly and reached for the object. I leaned even closer to the phone screen. The camera quality was clear enough to show his hand picking something up, but from that distance I could not tell what it was. I rewound the video and watched the moment again. Thomas stepping out of the back door, looking around, walking across the driveway, stumbling slightly, something dropping, him bending down to grab it. My heart began beating a little faster. I enlarged the frame as much as the app allowed and replayed the clip again. This time I slowed the playback speed. The object flashed briefly under the outdoor light mounted above the back door, a sharp glimmer. For a fraction of a second it caught the light and reflected it. I froze the frame. The small object lay on the pavement just before Thomas reached down. Even with the reduced image quality, I could see something unmistakable, a curve of metal, a cluster of bright reflections. My breath caught in my throat. The shape looked familiar. Too familiar. I tapped the rewind button again and played the moment slowly. Thomas stepping forward. The stumble. The object falling, the brief flash of light. He crouched and picked it up quickly, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. After that, he glanced around one more time before walking quickly out of the camera's frame. I stared at the screen without moving. The kitchen felt strangely quiet around me. Outside the window, the lake shimmered under pale morning sunlight. Inside my chest, something cold and steady began to form. Because even though the video was not perfectly clear, the shape that had fallen onto the pavement looked exactly like the necklace my mom had been searching for. But I needed to be certain. I leaned back in my chair and watched the video again, and again, each time focusing more carefully on the moment the object hit the ground, the sparkle, the curve, the way Thomas hurried to hide it. My pulse beat slowly but firmly in my ears. The camera had recorded the driveway outside my parents' house on the night of the birthday party. And in that quiet, accidental footage, it had captured something no one else had seen. Thomas Hale stepped out of the house with something he clearly did not want anyone to notice. I rested the phone on the table and sat back in my chair. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. Because the meaning of what I had just watched was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. The necklace had not disappeared mysteriously inside the house. Someone had taken it, and the camera in my car had just recorded the moment that person tried to leave with it. I reached forward and replayed the clip one more time. This time I watched Thomas's face carefully, the quick glance over his shoulder, the tension in his movements, the urgency when he bent down to pick up the object. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. A long, quiet minute passed before I finally leaned back again. For days, my family had believed a story that pointed directly at me, a story that made sense because of who they thought I was. But now I was staring at a different version of events, one recorded by a machine that had no loyalty to anyone. And if that video showed what I believed it showed, everything about the investigation was about to change. I picked up the phone again and forced myself to slow down. Panic would not help me. Hope would not help me either. I had spent too many years around people who could turn uncertainty into whatever story they needed. If I was going to trust this video, I needed to know exactly what I was seeing. So I started over from the beginning. Thomas stepped out through the back door of my parents' house, his shoulders slightly hunched, his head turning first toward the yard and then toward the street. Even before the object fell, there was tension in the way he moved. He did not look like a man taking a breath of fresh air during a family party. He looked like a man trying not to be noticed. I enlarged the frame again until the picture began to lose sharpness around the edges. Then I lowered the playback speed and watched his right hand. It was partly hidden by his jacket. For 1 second, I thought maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe the object was just a keychain or a phone or something ordinary that happened to catch the light at the wrong angle. Then I replayed the moment again, and there it was. A quick flash, almost like water catching sunlight. Something curved, something bright, something delicate enough to swing when it hit the pavement. I put the phone down for a second and pressed both palms flat against the table. My kitchen felt colder than it had a minute earlier. I had lived alone long enough to know how silence can change shape. There is the ordinary kind, the kind that wraps around a peaceful morning. Then there is the other kind, the kind that arrives when a truth walks into the room and sits down across from you. That was the silence around me then. I picked up the phone again. This time I opened the video editing tools in the app and advanced frame by frame through the moment Thomas stumbled. He moved fast, but not fast enough. Frame by frame, I watched his heel catch at the edge of the driveway. Frame by frame, I watched his shoulder jerk slightly. Frame by frame, I watched the object slip free. When it hit the ground, the porch light above the back door caught it cleanly. The screen filled with a burst of white reflection. My breath stopped. Even in a grainy frame, I knew that shine. Not because I had ever worn the necklace, because my mom had shown it off often enough over the years for everyone in the family to know it by sight. A diamond cluster at the center, smaller stones trailing in a graduated line, set in pale gold. Elegant, expensive, and unmistakable. I zoomed in farther. The image blurred at the edges, but the shape remained. There was no reasonable explanation left. Thomas bent down quickly, scooped the necklace off the pavement, looked around one more time, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket with a movement that was too practiced to be innocent. If he had simply found it outside, he would have held it up, looked around, called for someone. He did none of that. He hid it. I watched that part 5 more times. By the 7th viewing, I no longer felt shock. What I felt instead was something colder, steadier, and in some ways more painful. Relief. Not the warm kind. The harsh kind that comes when you finally know you are not losing your mind. For more than a week, I had been living under an accusation that felt too absurd to defend against. My sister believed it. The police were investigating it. My relatives were passing it around quietly between text messages and phone calls. And now, in a video I had almost erased, the real story sat right in front of me. Thomas had left the house with the necklace. I stood up from the table and walked to the sink, more out of instinct than intention. I stared out the window at the strip of lake visible through the trees and tried to think clearly. The first thought that came to me was simple. Victoria. I imagined her face if she saw this. Not because I wanted to hurt her, although part of me was still raw from the way she had looked at me that night, but because she had built the entire case against me around certainty. She had called the police without hesitation. She had spoken to me like I was some sad, desperate woman who finally crossed the line because she could not stand being around wealth she had never achieved. And all the while, her own husband had apparently walked out of the house with the necklace tucked inside his coat. I sat back down. My hands were steady now. I replayed the video from a few seconds earlier just to see if there was anything else I had missed. Thomas opened the back door with his shoulder as if one hand was already occupied. He did not linger in the doorway. He came out fast. Not running, but moving with purpose. He was halfway across the driveway before the stumble happened. I froze the frame again when the necklace lay on the pavement. The porch light hit the diamonds just enough to bring them alive for one hard, undeniable second. I thought of my mom opening the empty jewelry box, her face going pale in front of the guests. I thought of Victoria asking who had gone upstairs. I thought of Laura remembering that I had been on the second floor looking for the bathroom. I thought of the entire room turning toward me in one smooth, terrible motion. The accusation had landed so easily because it fit an old pattern. I had always been the one outside the center of things, the one from Duluth, the one with a smaller life, the one easier to suspect. And Thomas, by contrast, fit beautifully into the family portrait everyone preferred. He was polished, successful sounding, careful with his manners, the kind of husband people pointed to and said your sister did well for herself. I had never trusted him exactly, but I had never seen him clearly either. He was always there beside Victoria, smiling at the right moments, offering to help with coats, talking just enough about real estate and investment opportunities to sound impressive without ever saying much of substance. I wondered, suddenly, how much of that had been performance. I reached for my coffee and took a sip. It had gone cold. The video was still open on my screen. I knew I needed to preserve it properly before doing anything else. Not just the file itself, but copies. Timestamp visible. Cloud record intact. I sent the video to my laptop, saved it to an external drive, and emailed a copy to myself. Then I watched it again on the larger screen of my computer. The bigger image made the truth worse somehow. Not less believable. More human. Thomas's face was visible for a second as he bent down. His expression was not panicked. It was irritating, as if the fall had been an inconvenience in the middle of something he was determined to finish. That expression bothered me more than anything. It meant this was not an impulsive act driven by sudden temptation. This was action with intent. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. A memory surfaced that I had not thought about in years. My grandfather stood beside me in the hardware aisle of a store in Duluth when I was maybe 14, teaching me how to compare two nearly identical tools by weight alone. Cheap things usually look fine from far away, he had said. It is up close that they tell on themselves. I opened my eyes and looked at Thomas on the screen. Up close, the image told him. I checked the timestamp on the footage. It aligned almost perfectly with the gap between when I had come back downstairs and when my mom discovered the empty jewelry box. He had enough time. He had an opportunity. And now I had proof that he left the back of the house with the necklace. The next question came almost immediately. What did I do with it? For a few minutes, I considered calling Officer Briggs first. He was the investigating officer. That would have been the cleanest move. But before law enforcement, there was one person who needed to see this, my sister. Not because she deserved advance warning, because she had accused me in front of everyone. She had called the police with my name already settled in her mind. She had looked at me as if poverty and distance were the same thing as guilt. If she was going to keep doing that, I wanted her to do it after seeing the truth. I drafted a text and deleted it. Then another. Finally, I wrote only this. I need you to look at something immediately. It concerns Thomas and the necklace. I attached the video. For a moment, I hesitated before pressing send. Once I did, everything would start moving. The investigation would turn. My sister's marriage might crack open in ways she could not repair. My parents would have to face the fact that they had doubted the wrong person. And whatever happened next, we were not going back to the version of the family we had been before that birthday. I pressed send. The message left my phone, and the little bar beneath the attachment filled slowly as the file uploaded. Then it was done. Delivered. I sat very still and listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant cry of a gull outside, the wind coming off the lake. For the first time since the party, I was not waiting helplessly for someone else to decide who I was. Now I had something solid, something that did not depend on charm or assumptions or old family habits. And all that remained was to see what my sister would do when the story she believed so completely began to fall apart. She called me 11 minutes later. I know that because I stared at my phone the whole time, watching the screen stay dark while my coffee went cold again beside me. I had expected some delay. Shock takes time. Denial takes time too. But 11 minutes felt like exactly enough time for someone to watch a video twice and decide what version of it they could live with. When her name finally lit up on my screen, I answered on the second ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Victoria said my name in a voice so controlled it almost sounded empty. Rachel. Did you watch it? Yes. Another pause. I waited for the apology that never came. Instead, she said, that does not prove what you think it proves. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the kitchen floor. What? The video shows Thomas outside, she said. It shows him picking something up. It does not show him taking the necklace from Mom's room. I stared at the window over my sink, at the stretch of pale blue water just visible through the trees, and felt something cold settle into place inside me. Victoria, it shows him coming out of the house, looking around, dropping the necklace, and hiding it in his jacket. It shows him picking something up off the driveway. It is the necklace. You cannot see that clearly. I laughed once, quietly, not because anything was funny, but because I suddenly understood what this call was really about. I spent a week under suspicion because you were willing to connect every dot in the worst possible way when it came to me. But now you need absolute certainty. That is not fair, she snapped. No, I said. What was not fair was calling the police on me in front of 30 people because I used the upstairs bathroom. Her breathing shifted on the other end of the line. I could picture her exactly, standing in her office or pacing her living room in Chicago, one hand pressed to her forehead, trying to keep everything inside her world from splitting open. Rachel, listen to me carefully. The camera does not show the inside of the house. I know that. So it does not prove theft. I close my eyes. She was doing what lawyers do when the truth threatens something they love. She was narrowing definitions, reducing a living situation to technical weaknesses. Building doubt, not because doubt was honest, but because doubt was useful. I opened my eyes again and said, if that had been me in the video, you would have called it proof. That is different. Why? Because you were upstairs. And Thomas is my husband, she said, as if that explained everything. The words hung there for a second. Then I understood what she was really saying. Not that the video was weak, that her marriage was stronger than the truth, at least for the moment. I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, the phone pressed hard against my ear. Victoria, did you show it to him? Of course I showed it to him. And what did he say? He said he found it outside. I stopped walking. Found it. Yes. Outside, in the driveway, and instead of bringing it back into the house where everyone was panicking, he put it in his jacket and walked off with it. He said he was trying to avoid making things worse in the middle of the party. I let that sit between us for a second because even repeating it out loud made it sound ridiculous. He was trying to avoid making things worse, I said slowly, so he hid a $500,000 necklace and told no one. He did not hide it. That is exactly what he did. You are twisting this, she said, and something sharp entered her voice for the first time. You always do this. You take one piece of something and make it mean everything. My grip tightened around the phone. I make it mean everything. You sent me a video like you expected me to turn on my husband instantly. Do you understand what you are doing? I understood perfectly. I am showing you the first real evidence anyone has seen since you accused me. No, she said, you are trying to redirect suspicion. I felt heat rise in my chest then, fast and clean. Redirect suspicion. For one terrible second, I could not speak. After everything, after the police report, after the calls from relatives, after Mom's careful little text and Dad's silence, she still believed that I was somehow maneuvering, somehow playing a part, somehow capable of manufacturing this because I could not bear being caught. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Do you hear yourself right now? Victoria did not answer. I kept going. You called me a thief in front of the entire family. You told the police I had motive because I was broke. You made me into a story that was easy for everyone to believe. And now I send you a video of your husband walking out with Mom's necklace, and suddenly you need nuance. That is not what this is. Then tell me what it is. Her silence told me she did not have a version that sounded as convincing out loud as it did in her head. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, not softer, more guarded. Rachel, I think you resent my marriage more than you realize. I blinked. What? You have never liked Thomas. I do not know Thomas well enough to dislike him. That is not true. It absolutely is true. He is your husband, not mine. He is someone I see at holidays and family dinners. That is all. She exhaled sharply. You have always looked at our life like it is some performance. Because it is. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had gone further than usual, but I did not take them back. Victoria's voice dropped. What is that supposed to mean? It means that everyone in this family is so invested in appearances that they would rather believe the least powerful person in the room is guilty than admit something ugly happened inside the picture they built. That is dramatic even for you. No, I said, this is dramatic. Calling the police on your own sister because it was easier than asking whether maybe someone closer to you had reasons you did not want to see. That pushed her over. Do not do that, she said sharply. Do not try to poison this because you feel cornered. I laughed again, bitter this time. cornered. Victoria, I am not the one in the video. Her breathing had changed now. Faster, less controlled. I could hear the strain beneath her careful words. Thomas is not perfect, she said, but he would not do this. How do you know? Because I know him. The certainty in her answer would have moved me once. It did not now. It only made me tired. You thought you knew me too, I said. That landed. I heard it in the silence that followed. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. You and I are not the same, Rachel. I stood very still. No, I said, we are not. She took that as agreement. You have always lived outside this family, outside what it takes to hold things together. You do not understand how much damage one accusation like this could do. I almost told her that she should have thought about that before accusing me in a room full of our parents' business contacts. But I did not, because suddenly I saw the entire shape of it. She still thought she was protecting something important, not the truth, the structure of her life, her husband, her reputation, her reputation, her reputation, her certainty. The image of a family where success and order still meant safety. And if that structure required me to remain the most believable suspect, then so be it. When I spoke again, my voice had gone flat. What are you going to do? I am forwarding the video to my attorney. I felt myself go cold. Your attorney? Yes. He thinks we should request a court hearing to review the footage formally. I sat down slowly on the arm of my couch. A hearing. If the evidence is as strong as you claim, then it will stand up there too, she said. If it is not, then we will know that. I almost admired the elegance of it. She was turning my proof into something that still placed me inside a system of doubt. She would not say the words, I do not believe you, because she already had. Instead, she was dressing disbelief as a process. You still think I could have something to do with this, I said. Her answer came too fast. I think this video raises questions. It answered one. Not enough. I looked at the wall across from me, at the framed sketch of the lake my grandfather had drawn years ago. The house felt suddenly very far from Chicago, very far from everything that had happened in that city, and yet the pressure of it all was right there in my chest. Fine, I said. Request the hearing. Rachel. No. You wanted the police. You wanted a procedure. You wanted to make this official. So do it. She hesitated, maybe hearing something in my tone that had not been there before. I am trying to be careful. You were not careful with me. That silenced her again. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. You do not understand what this looks like from my side. I stood and walked back to the kitchen, needing movement, needing something solid under my hands. I understand exactly what it looks like from your side. That is the problem. From your side, I have always been easier to doubt. She did not deny that either. We ended the call without anything close to peace. No goodbye, no softening, just the hard click of two people reaching the end of what they were willing to say. I set the phone down and stood there for a long time. The house around me was quiet again, but it did not feel like home at that moment. It felt like the place where I was gathering myself before impact. By evening, I received an email from a law office in Chicago informing me that counsel for Victoria Hale had requested formal review of the dash camera footage in connection with the ongoing theft investigation. The hearing would determine evidentiary relevance and guide the next phase of police action. Even the wording felt like an insult. Guide the next phase. As if my life had not already been shaped for over a week by what my sister chose to believe. I printed the email, then printed still frames from the video. One showed Thomas stepping out of the back door. Another caught the necklace halfway to the pavement. I laid them out across my kitchen table and stared at them until the light outside faded. It was strange. The more I looked at the images, the less emotional I felt. Not calmer exactly. Clearer. I realized that what had broken between my sister and me was not simply trust. It was the illusion that truth mattered more to her than loyalty when loyalty was expensive. She had chosen her husband, she had chosen the story that protected her life, and now she had chosen the story that protected her life, and now she had chosen a courtroom over a conversation. If that was where she needed the truth to speak, then that was where it would speak. I gathered the printed pages into a neat stack, set them beside my laptop, and looked once more at the frozen frame of Thomas crouched on the driveway with my mother's necklace in his hand. Then I turned off the kitchen light and let the room go dark, knowing the next time this story moved, it would move in front of a judge. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of September at the Cook County Courthouse in Chicago. I drove down the day before and stayed in a small hotel near the river because I could not bear the thought of sleeping under my parents' roof the night before walking into court with my own sister on the other side of the room. I barely slept anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same frozen frame from the video. Thomas bent over I put on the navy blouse and gray slacks I usually wore when meeting high-end clients, pulled my hair back, and drove to the courthouse with the video saved in 3 places. Cook County Courthouse was exactly the kind of building that made people lower their voices as soon as they stepped inside. Gray stone, metal detectors, marble floors worn smooth by thousands of anxious footsteps. It smelled faintly of paper, old air conditioning, and burnt coffee from somewhere deeper in the building. I checked in, went through security, and followed the signs upstairs. The hallway outside the courtroom was already crowded. Lawyers carrying slim leather briefcases moved with the kind of practiced speed that always made everyone else feel slow. Families. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried briefly, then went silent. And near the far window, standing with one hand wrapped around a paper coffee cup, was Victoria. She saw me before I reached the courtroom door. For a second, neither of us moved. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and a dark-fitted skirt, her hair pinned back, every detail as polished, as if she were headed into a client meeting instead of a legal proceeding tied to the night she accused her sister of theft. Thomas stood beside her. That hit me harder than I expected. Some stubborn part of me had believed that after seeing the video, after hearing my voice on the phone, after deciding to push this into court instead of admitting she had been wrong, Victoria might at least. My mother sat on the bench a few feet away, both hands wrapped around her purse. Dad stood near the wall, staring at the floor. No one smiled. No one said good morning. I kept walking until I reached the row of seats closest to the courtroom door and sat down by myself. A few minutes later, Officer Briggs stepped out of another room, saw me, and gave a small nod. His face was neutral, but not cold. He had reviewed the file. He knew why we were there. Still, procedure was procedure. That was one thing I had learned in the last few weeks. Truth did not move just because it was true. It had to move through systems, objections, signatures, hearings. Victoria crossed the hallway and stopped in front of me. Her voice was low. This does not have to become uglier than it already is. I looked up at her. You made sure it was ugly the night you called the police. A small flicker crossed her face. A small flicker crossed her face. Annoyance more than shame. I am talking about what happens there. So am I. She glanced toward the closed courtroom door. The judge is going to look at whether this footage is relevant. That is all. I held her gaze. It is relevant. Her jaw tightened slightly. Rachel, just because you believe something does not make it legally clear. There it was again. That shift into technical language whenever emotion threatened to break through. I almost admired how quickly she could convert family damage into legal vocabulary. I said nothing. After a moment, she stepped back and returned to Thomas. He never once looked directly at me. That bothered me more than if he had glared. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors and began calling people inside. The room was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, a state seal mounted behind the bench, rows of benches polished by use. A quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was not a grand courtroom, just a working one, the kind where ordinary people came face to face with the fact that their private disasters had become part of the public record. Judge Benjamin Carter entered a few minutes later. He looked to be in his late 50s, silver at the temples, composed in the way people are when they have spent years listening to other people's messes without becoming part of them. Everyone stood, then sat. The clerk read the matter into the record. The hearing concerned the evidentiary relevance of digital footage in connection with an active theft investigation involving high-value property. Hearing those words spoken aloud made the whole thing feel even stranger. High-value property, as if my family had become a case file and a line item. Victoria had retained outside counsel for the hearing, a man in a dark blue suit with a smooth voice and the kind of expression that suggested he had never once raised his tone because he never needed to. He stood first. Your Honor, the footage offered by Miss Whitaker is speculative at best. It does not depict the alleged theft. It does not show the inside of the residence. It shows only that Mr. Hale was outside and at some point bent down to retrieve an object. The object itself is not clearly identified in the footage, and any conclusions beyond that are assumptions. His delivery was polished enough that if I had not lived inside this story, I might have believed him. Judge Carter turned slightly toward Officer Briggs and then toward me. Miss Whitaker, do you have the footage available for display? Yes, Your Honor. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The bailiff helped connect my laptop to the courtroom monitor. My hands did not shake, but I was aware of every movement as if my body had become heavier inside its own skin. This was the moment where a private certainty either held or fell apart. The video appeared on the screen at the front of the room. My car sat parked behind my parents' house. The camera angle showed the back drive, part of the rear entrance, and the side yard fading into shadow. Judge Carter leaned forward slightly. Please play it from the beginning. I pressed play. The room filled with silence as the footage rolled. At first, nothing happened, just the still driveway in the evening light, a slight movement in tree branches, a flicker from the porch lamp, then the back door opened. Thomas stepped out. I felt movement beside me before I actually looked. Victoria had shifted in her seat. Not much, just enough to tell me she was already bracing herself. The attorney rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Again, the mere presence of my client's husband outside the residence proves nothing. Judge Carter lifted a hand without taking his eyes off the screen. Sit down, counselor. The attorney sat. The video continued. Thomas moved quickly across the driveway, glancing once toward the street. I could feel the room narrowing around that image. Judge Carter said, Stop. I paused the video. Rewind 10 seconds and play again. Slower. I did. This time the movement was more obvious. The quick look over the shoulder, the pace, the tension in his posture. The attorney stood again. Your Honor, with respect, there is no visual proof of what object is being discussed here. Judge Carter did not look at him. We are not finished. Play it. I played the next section. Thomas's foot caught. His upper body jerked. Something slipped from his hand and struck the pavement. Judge Carter said, Stop again. I froze the frame. My own heartbeat felt loud enough to hear. Zoom. I enlarged the image as much as the screen would allow. The picture softened at the edges, but the bright cluster on the ground was still visible, caught by the porch light for one hard, glinting second. The attorney stood once more. Objection. The image quality is too poor to support definitive identification. Judge Carter turned to him for the first time. You may object after I have seen the full sequence, counselor. Something in the judge's tone shifted the room. Not dramatically, just enough. I pressed play again. Thomas bent down quickly, grabbed the object, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Even on mute, even without context, there was something unmistakably private in the way he did it. Not discovery, concealment. A long second passed after the clip ended. Then Judge Carter looked at me. Was this the full file submitted to the court? No, Your Honor. I heard a slight movement from the other side of the room. Victoria turned sharply toward me. Thomas did not move at all. The judge's expression did not change. Explain. The clip I first sent my sister was trimmed to the part where he exits the house and picks up the necklace, I said. The original file continues after that. The attorney stood immediately. Objection. If additional footage exists that has not been properly authenticated in advance, we request time for review. Officer Briggs spoke before the judge answered. Your Honor, the complete file was turned over to the department yesterday evening and preserved. We have reviewed the chain of custody evening and preserved. We have reviewed the chain of custody. It appears to be the same continuous recording. Judge Carter nodded once. Overruled for the purpose of review. Play the entire file. For the first time since the hearing began, Thomas looked directly at me. He did not look outraged or defensive. He looked worried. It was small, but once I saw it, I could not unsee it. The tightness around his mouth. The stillness that had become too still. The way his shoulders seemed to lock in place as if movement itself might make the screen more dangerous. Victoria noticed it too. I could tell by the way she turned toward him for half a second before fixing her eyes forward again. I rewound to the point where the shortened clip had ended. My finger rested lightly over the space bar. The room was so quiet I could hear papers shift near the clerk's desk. Judge Carter folded his hands once on the bench and looked at the monitor. Play the rest. And I did. The video resumed with the same grainy quiet that had filled the courtroom before, but now every second felt charged. Thomas had just slipped the necklace into the inside pocket of his jacket. Instead of going back into the house, he kept moving. He reached the side of my car and stopped beside the passenger door, half hidden from the view of the porch light. Then he pulled out his phone. There was no audio, just a silent man standing in a driveway, speaking into the dark. At first it looked like nothing. A call. A few words. A tense conversation after an awkward moment. Then Judge Carter leaned forward. Pause it. I froze the frame. Thomas stood with the phone at his ear, his head turned slightly to the side. The judge looked at the screen for a long second, then at me. Can the sequence be advanced slowly? Yes, Your Honor. I did as he asked, moving the video forward one small segment at a time. Thomas spoke again. His mouth formed words clearly enough in the bright edge of the porch light. Officer Briggs stood from the second row and moved a step closer to the monitor. He had the posture of a man trying not to overstate what he was seeing. Judge Carter spoke quietly. "Play that section again." I rewound it and let it run. Thomas shifted his weight, pressed the phone tighter to his ear, and said the same sentence again. This time there was no mistaking the shape of the words. "Once I sell it, the debt is gone." No one in the room moved. It was not dramatic in the way television teaches people courtrooms are dramatic. No gasps. No one jumped to their feet. Just a silence so complete it made every breath sound intrusive. I heard my mom inhale sharply behind me. Victoria did not make a sound. Judge Carter kept his eyes on the screen another few seconds, then looked toward Thomas. "Mr. Hale, stand up." Thomas rose slowly. His attorney got to his feet right after him. "Your Honor, I need to object to any interpretation of silent footage without expert foundation." Judge Carter's expression barely changed. "Your objection is noted. Sit down." The attorney hesitated just long enough to show he did not want to, then sat. Judge Carter turned to Officer Briggs. "In light of what has been shown, I want additional questioning conducted immediately." Officer Briggs nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." Everything after that moved with a strange, heavy inevitability. The kind of movement that comes after a room has already understood the truth, but has to let procedure catch up to it. Thomas stayed standing. Victoria was staring at him now, fully, not the quick, nervous glances from earlier. She was looking at him the way people look at a landscape after a storm has passed and realize the house they thought was standing is actually gone. Officer Briggs stepped into the open area in front of the benches. "Mr. Hale, did you remove the necklace from the residence on the evening of August 18th? Thomas kept his eyes on the judge, not on the officer. "No." "Did you place the necklace in the inside pocket of your jacket?" "No." "Did you place the necklace in the inside pocket of your jacket?" "Did you make the phone call shown in the video?" "Yes." "What were you referring to when you said, 'Once I sell it, the debt is gone'?" Thomas looked toward his attorney. The attorney rose halfway, then sat back down when Judge Carter lifted a hand. "Mr. Hale will answer." Thomas swallowed. "That statement is being taken out of context." Officer Briggs did not react. "What debt were you referring to?" "A business matter." "What business matters?" "A private investment issue." "How much money are we talking about?" Thomas hesitated. "I do not remember exactly." That answer changed the room. Not because it was shocking, but because it was the kind of lie that tells itself. No one forgets the rough size of the debt that keeps them up at night. Officer Briggs asked again, "How much money?" Thomas let out a breath through his nose. "Around 280,000. Victoria made a sound then, not a word. More like the air had been pushed out of her all at once. I turned slightly and saw her staring at him, her face drained of color. Judge Carter folded his hands on the bench. "And when exactly were you planning to sell what you said you would sell?" Thomas did not answer. Officer Briggs took one step closer. "Mr. Hale, this is not complicated. The footage shows you leaving the house with an object that appears consistent with the missing necklace. It shows you concealing that object. It then shows you making a phone call in which you refer to selling something to eliminate a debt of approximately $280,000. Do you understand the seriousness of your position right now?" Thomas finally looked down. "Yes." "Then answer the question." He stayed silent long enough that the courtroom began to feel airless. I looked at my hands folded in my lap and realized they were not shaking anymore. For the first time since the birthday party, I felt still. The attorney stood again. "Your Honor, my client would benefit from a recess and formal counsel before any further questioning." Judge Carter considered that for half a second, then looked at Thomas. "Mr. Hale, I am going to ask you directly. Did you take the necklace from Mrs. Directly?" "Whitaker's room?" Thomas closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, something had changed. It was not honest exactly, more like exhaustion. The look of a person who finally sees that the version of events they were trying to hold together no longer has enough pieces. "Yes," he said. "My mom began crying softly behind me. It was not loud, just one small sound that made every other silence in the room feel deeper." Victoria did not move. Officer Briggs continued, "Describe what happened." Thomas's voice had lost all its polish now. "I went upstairs to use the guest bathroom. I passed your room," he said, glancing toward my mom and then away again. "The bedroom door was partly open. I saw the jewelry box on the dresser." He swallowed. "I knew the necklace was there because your mom had mentioned wearing it." My mom covered her mouth with one hand. Thomas kept going because now that he had started, there was no way back into elegance. I had been trying to fix something for weeks. An investment deal in Milwaukee had gone bad. I was already behind, and the people involved were not willing to wait much longer. Officer Briggs said, "The $280,000. Yes." He looked at the judge now, not because he wanted sympathy, but because he wanted sympathy, but because he wanted the pressure of his wife's eyes off him. "I thought if I could sell the necklace quickly, I could cover most of it and buy time to sort the rest out." "You thought," Judge Carter said quietly, "that stealing your mother-in-law's diamond necklace during her birthday party was the solution." Thomas flinched at the word stealing more than he had at any other point in the hearing. "I was going to replace it." No one in the room believed that, not even him. Officer Briggs asked how he had expected to sell a piece that was distinctive. Thomas said there were brokers in Chicago who dealt quietly with estate jewelry and unregistered private transactions. He had not finalized anything, but he had made inquiries. He had stepped outside to call someone after taking the necklace. "That was the call on the video. Once I sell it, the call on the video. Once I sell it, the debt is gone." The sentence sounded even uglier now that everyone knew exactly what it meant. And through all of it, Victoria said nothing. I looked at her then, really looked at her. She was sitting straight, almost rigid, her eyes fixed on Thomas as if he had become someone she had never seen before. There was no dramatic collapse, no tears spilling down her face in a way that might have made the moment easier for everyone else to understand. Just a total, terrible stillness. Some people break loudly. Victoria broke in silence. "Some people break in silence. Did your wife know anything about this?" Thomas answered quickly. "No. That, at least, I believed. Because if Victoria had known, she would never have called the police on me so confidently. Her certainty had been real. Cruel, but real. And somehow that made everything worse. She had destroyed me in public because she trusted the wrong person in private." Officer Briggs requested permission to place Thomas under formal investigation and to take immediate possession of his phone records and financial documents. Judge Carter granted it. The hearing shifted from disputed evidence to a clear investigative direction in less than 10 minutes, and I thought then how strange justice can be. Sometimes it crawls. Sometimes it turns all at once. My mom was crying openly now. Dad had not moved from the bench, but his face looked older than it had an hour earlier. The kind of older that comes not from age, but from recognition. Recognition that he had stood in his own house and watched his younger daughter be accused while the actual thief had been standing only a few feet away. Thomas was escorted to the side to speak with Officer Briggs and another officer who had entered quietly during the questioning. His attorney kept talking in low, urgent. Victoria finally turned to me. There are moments when a person's face becomes more honest than anything they could ever say. Hers did then. Shock, humiliation, grief, disbelief, and beneath all of it, something rawer than any of those. Shame. Not because her husband had lied to her. Not only that, because she had looked at me and seen guilt so easily. I did not feel triumphant. That surprised me. After everything, after the police, after the texts from relatives, after the week of being treated like the kind of woman who would steal from her own mother, I expected some surge of satisfaction. What I felt instead was sorrow, not gentle sorrow, something sharper. The sorrow of understanding that the truth had not repaired anything. It had only revealed where the damage already was. Judge Carter announced that the matter before the court had shifted materially and that further criminal review would proceed through the proper channels. The hearing was adjourned. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. Benches scraped softly against the floor as people stood. Papers were gathered. The chairs moved. Quiet voices returned to the room like people creeping back after a storm. But nothing could soften what had just happened. My mother had lost her necklace. Victoria had lost the certainty she built her life on. And I had lost whatever was left of the belief that my place in that family could ever be made secure simply by being patient long enough. I gathered my laptop and the folder of printed screenshots with slow, careful movements. I did not want to look rushed. I did not want to look rushed. I did not want to look angry. I wanted only to leave with the same dignity I had been denied when this began. As I slid the papers back into the folder, I heard my sister stand behind me. She did not speak yet. Neither did I. I could feel that whatever came next between us would not happen in the courtroom itself. It would happen outside, in the long hallway beyond those wooden doors, where there would be no judge, no video screen, no one left to hide behind except ourselves. It would happen outside, in the long hallway beyond those wooden doors, where there would be no judge, no video screen, no one left to hide behind except ourselves. I walked out of the courtroom with my laptop tucked under one, but for a few seconds it felt like the entire corridor had narrowed to just the sound of my heels and my sister's footsteps behind me. Rachel. I stopped but did not turn immediately. Then I faced her. Victoria looked nothing like she had looked that night in my mom's living room when she pointed at me and called the police. The confidence was gone. The certainty too. Her face had gone pale under the courthouse lights, and the careful posture she wore like armor had slit just enough to show the woman underneath it. Not the attorney, not the polished daughter. Just a woman who had watched the life she thought she understood crack open in public. "I did not know," she said. There it was. The sentence I knew was coming the moment Thomas admitted everything. I looked at her for a long second. "You did not want to know." She flinched, almost too small to notice, but I saw it. "That is not fair." "No," I said quietly. "What was not fair was standing in Mom's house and calling me a thief because your story was easier than the truth." Victoria looked down the hallway as if she needed somewhere else to place her eyes. Her voice dropped lower. "I believed what made sense." Exactly. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Because we both knew what I meant. It made sense to her that I would steal. It made sense to the family because I lived far away. Because my life looked smaller from Chicago. Because I was not the impressive one, not the successful one, not the successful one, not the daughter whose name opened doors in the city. I had always been easier to doubt. Victoria crossed one arm over her waist, the way people do when they are trying to hold themselves together without making it obvious. "I never thought he would do something like this." "I believe that," I said. She looked back at me then, almost startled. "I do. I believe you did not know. But you were still willing to destroy me before you asked yourself whether maybe you did not know everything." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. There was nothing elegant left for her to say. A few feet away, Mom stood near the courtroom door with Dad. She had been crying. The skin around her eyes was red, and the careful makeup she had worn for the hearing had started to fade around the edges. Dad looked older than I had ever seen him, not fragile, just diminished somehow, as if the hearing had forced him to see years of things he had chosen not to notice. Thomas came out a minute later with Officer Briggs and another officer. He was not handcuffed, not yet, but he was no longer moving like a man in control of his own day. His attorney stayed close, speaking in a low voice that no longer sounded persuasive. For 1 second, Thomas looked up and his eyes met mine. I expected anger, maybe embarrassment. What I saw instead was emptiness, the blank look of a man who had run out of explanations and knew it. Then he was guided down the hall and away. Victoria watched him go, and something in her face changed again. Not toward me, toward herself. The delayed realization that betrayal does not just come from what someone did, it comes from all the moments before that when you defended them at someone else's expense. I turned to leave. "Rachel," Mom said. I stopped because it was my mom, because despite everything, there is some part of being a daughter that does not turn off all at once. She took 2 small steps toward me and then seemed unsure what to do with her hands. She wanted to touch my arm, I think, but she did not. Maybe she knew she had not earned that. "I am sorry." Her voice broke on the second word. I nodded once, but I did not tell her it was okay, because it was not okay. Maybe someday it would become survivable, understandable, something I could place on a shelf with other old family wounds and stop looking at too directly. But that day, in that hallway, the apology was not enough to soften what had happened. Dad still had not spoken. He was standing a little behind Mom, shoulders squared, his face set in that tired expression men his age sometimes wear when they realize silence has cost them more than speaking ever would have. Finally, he said my name. I looked at him. He cleared his throat. I was wrong. The words were simple. No polished speech. No excuse about confusion or pressure or wanting to avoid conflict. Just that. I was wrong. I had waited for years to hear something honest from my dad that did not come wrapped in practical language. And somehow, when it finally came, it was both less and more than I expected. I nodded again. Yes, you were. It was not cruel, just true. He accepted it with the same stillness I had accepted the accusation. No argument. No defense. That was the last meaningful conversation I had with either of them that day. I drove back to my hotel in silence. Chicago traffic moved around me in long, impatient lines, horns flaring at intersections, buses groaning at the curb, people crossing streets with their heads down against the wind off the river. Life in the city kept going, as if my family had not just come apart one floor above a marble hallway. Back in my room, I set my bag down and sat on the edge of the bed without taking off my shoes. I expected to cry then, or to feel relieved, or exhausted. Instead, I felt strangely empty, not numb. More like the space after a storm when everything is still standing, but nothing looks the way it did before. Over the next few weeks, the fallout came in slow, definite pieces. Thomas became the subject of a criminal investigation. Officer Briggs called once to confirm that the footage had been added to the case file and that financial records were being subpoenaed. I kept my answers brief. By then, I no longer needed details for closure. The truth had already done what it needed to do. Victoria moved out of the condo she shared with Thomas before the month was over. I learned that from Mom, not from Victoria herself. They were not divorced, not then, but they were no longer living together. The phrase people used was separated, as if a single polite word could contain the wreckage of trust. Mom called me about 2 weeks after the hearing. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "How are you?" It was such an ordinary question that for a second I did not know how to respond. She had not asked me that at the birthday party, not during the investigation, not when the police were still treating me like a possible thief. "I am fine," I said. She was quiet. "Rachel, I have replayed that night in my head more times than I can count. I looked out the window of my kitchen at the edge of the lake, gray and wide under a clouded sky." "I believe that," I said. "I should have stopped it," she said. "When Victoria said those things in front of everyone, I should have said something. I should have said something. I should have told the police to wait. I should have known." There was a rawness in her voice that made it impossible to doubt her regret. But regret and repair are not the same thing. "You should have trusted me," I said. "Yes." She cried quietly then, and I let the silence sit between us, not to punish her, because sometimes there is nothing else to add. Dad never called me directly after that first apology in the courthouse hallway, but he sent me a letter about a month later. An actual handwritten letter in a plain envelope with no return note beyond their Chicago address. That alone surprised me. Dad was not a man who wrote letters. The note was short. He said he had spent years telling himself that keeping the peace was the same as being a good father. He said he saw now that staying silent while one daughter was accused and another daughter did the accusing was not peace at all. It was cowardice. I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter and tucked it into the same drawer where I kept my grandmother's recipe cards and my grandfather's old pocket knife. Not because the wound was healed, because the truth, once spoken plainly, deserves to be kept. Fall came fully to Duluth. The air sharpened, the maples along my street turned bright red and then slowly let go of their leaves. I kept working, designing front walks, winterizing gardens, meeting clients who wanted retaining walls before the first frost. Life did what it always does. It kept going. And as it did, I noticed something changing in me. I no longer felt that low ache in my chest when my phone lit up with a family message. I no longer checked my tone before speaking to my mother as if one wrong word might cost me my place. I no longer thought of Chicago as home in any emotional sense. What the hearing had taken from me was painful, but what it gave me was cleaner than pain. It removed the last illusion. I did not belong there because I had never been fully seen there. The first real family I ever had lived in a modest house overlooking Lake Superior. They had believed me before I learned how to explain myself. They had trusted my character before I had accomplishments to point to. My grandparents had built my understanding of love around something simple and sturdy. Presence. By late October, I drove out to the cemetery where they were buried. The ground was covered in a thin layer of fallen leaves, yellow and brown pressed flat by recent rain. The sky was low and silver, the kind of northern sky that makes everything feel still. I parked near the old stone entrance and walked the short path with my hands in my coat pockets. Their headstones sat side by side beneath a maple tree. I stood there for a long time before speaking. It felt strange at first, the way talking at a grave always does. But after a while, the words came easily. I told them everything. I told them everything. About the birthday party. About the accusation. About the video. About the hearing. About Victoria's face when the truth finally became too big to deny. About Mom crying in the hallway. About Dad saying he was wrong. When I finished, the wind moved through the branches above me and scattered a few leaves at my feet. I thought of my grandmother in the kitchen, flour on her hands, telling me that people show you who they are when something valuable is at stake. I thought of my grandfather at the hardware store, teaching me that cheap things tell on themselves up close. And standing there between their graves, I realized the lesson under everything that had happened. Family is not the place where you are born. Family is the place where someone knows who you are before the accusation starts. The place where trust does not vanish the first time a richer, easier story appears. The place where love is strong enough to pause before it condemns. I had spent years quietly hoping that if I stayed patient enough, kind enough, low maintenance enough, my place in my parents' family would eventually feel secure. But dignity does not grow in borrowed soil. It grows where truth is welcome. I looked down at their names carved into stone and felt something settle inside me for good. Not bitterness, not victory, just clarity. I turned and walked back toward my car with the cold wind in my face and the lake somewhere beyond the trees. The afternoon was fading, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence around me felt earned instead of lonely. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.